Another more recent leading case on promissory estoppel is Beer Capital Distributing versus Guinness Bass Import Co. The decision in this case comes from the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit. It was decided in 2002. A company called Beer Capital was for several years the distributor for Guinness Bass Import Company products in the state of Wisconsin or certain areas in Wisconsin. The relevant products included Guinness beer, Harp beer, and other alcoholic beverages. Guinness was looking to consolidate its distributors across the U.S. and was reconsidering its arrangement with Beer Capital and a number of other distributors. The intention was to terminate contracts with a number of distributors and replace these arrangements with a few major contracts for a small number of selected distributors. Beer Capital had been a very successful distributor, and it was told at one point by Guinness's regional manager that it was a leading contender in getting the new agreement. In early 2000, the founder and president of Beer Capital attended a meeting with Guinness managers. He contended that at this meeting, Guinness representatives made further statements that a reasonable person in Beer Capital's position could have interpreted as a promise on which it could reasonably rely that it would be selected as the consolidated distributor. Among others, Beer Capital was asked whether it would be willing to pay 2 to 9 times earnings to the other 4 current distributors to gain an exclusive distributorship. Beer Capital said yes. Beer Capital contends that the question comprised a promise or representation that Beer Capital would become the exclusive Southern Wisconsin distributor. Beer Capital also maintains that in reliance on that promise, it hired new staff members and continued to make improvements that it had begun based on the statement that it was the leading candidate, including installing a new computer system and expanding its facilities. However, in April 2000, Guinness terminated and did not extend its distribution agreement with Beer Capital. In response, Beer Capital sued Guinness Bass, among others, based on promissory estoppel. The issue for the court to decide was whether the negotiations between Beer Capital and Guinness Bass Import Company gave rise to promissory estoppel claims. The court, in an opinion that relied heavily on the principles developed in Hoffman v. Red Owl Stores, held for Guinness. The court explained that in order to prevail on a promissory estoppel claim, a plaintiff must present evidence establishing a promise on which the promisor should reasonably expect to induce action or forbearance, which did induce such action or forbearance, and that injustice can be avoided only by enforcement of that promise. According to the court, however, none of the alleged statements made by Guinness qualified as a promise. In contrast to Hoffman v. Red Owl, there was no clear statement that held out a contract or other benefit to the plaintiff. The court explained that a promise is a manifestation of intent by the promisor to be bound and is to be judged by an objective standard. The court found that reasonable people in the position of the plaintiff would not have reached the conclusion that Guinness was making a commitment. Instead, objectively, the defendant's statement that Beer Capital was a leading contender was a mere prediction, and the question regarding its willingness to pay for exclusive distributor status did also not amount to a promise. Because of the lack of promise, questions concerning Beer Capital's reliance on the statement and whether they could have been reasonably expected were immaterial. Indeed, the lack of a finding of a promise meant that the entire concept of promissory estoppel was inapplicable. After all, if there is no promise, there can be no estoppel. that is, preventing a party from going back on its word based on the promise. Beer Capital was thus left in the unenviable position of having made substantial new investments, but having lost its lucrative distribution agreement, unable to claim damages.